Hey, welcome back to my Stager YouTube channel. If you are meeting me for the first time, hello! My name is MickeyJo and I am obsessed with all things theatre. I love just about everything about theatre. I like going to the theatre, I like talking about the theatre, which is what I do here on YouTube. Feel free to subscribe if you like listening to me talk about theatre. And when I do go to the theatre, which is very often, one of the few things that I don't like about that experience is the other people who go to the theatre, or should I say, some of the other people who go to the theatre. Now, a little while ago, here on my channel, I made a video all about audience behaviour and how it feels as though it has gotten worse on both sides of the Atlantic since the pandemic and since theatres have reopened. And there has been a lot of talk about this. There have been studies into this. And that video was flooded with comments giving examples of dreadful audience behaviour that people have experienced both pre and post pandemic. And we've been hearing stories. Some of these have been bigger in the national press than others. And here we are again with another instance making headlines of terrible behaviour in the theatre. If this is the first you're hearing about it, then there was a riot at a performance of The Bodyguard in Manchester over the weekend that many people are linking to comments made by Alison, Hammond and Vanessa Feltz on breakfast television. Yes, you did hear all of those words in the right order. I'm going to explain all of this for you in today's video. If you enjoy this video, and enjoy is a very strong word for the level of exasperation that I'm about to share with you, feel free to subscribe to my Stager YouTube channel. As well as breaking down theatrical news, I review shows, and I get to talk about more fun and more exciting things than this particular headache of a news story. But it's important that we talk about it, so I'm going to dive right in. Here we go. Increasingly, since the pandemic, more and more shows, in particular jukebox musicals, who are uniquely encountering this problem because audiences are arriving knowing so many of the words and having such a fondness for the songs beforehand, especially audiences who don't necessarily go to a broad range of theatre shows, but will go to the stuff with the music that they recognise. They'll go to The Bodyguard for the Whitney songs. They'll go to Mamma Mia for the ABBA songs. So these shows have been finding ways to tackle this problem. At We Will Rock You on tour, there were signs outside and an announcement before the show advising people please not to sing along. Dreamgirls did the same thing in the foyer while on tour. Not a jukebox show, but one where, because of the movie, people know the music. Theatres have been imploring people not to try and sing along with the show because that is not the vibe. And if anyone has reached this point in the video and is surprised that I'm saying that, let me spell it out very plainly for you. For the vast majority of time that you spend in a theatre, you are not meant to sing along with the show. Why is that, you ask? Because your singing is very likely to be disruptive to the other audience members around you, and you are not by yourself having your own experience in which you are the main character and the only person that matters. It is a communal experience, you're very close to other people, and you have to have a mutual respect within the audience, within the auditorium, for each other's theatre-going experience. You may want to sing along, you may want to bring a whole bottle of wine, I may want to rock up in pyjamas, take my shoes off and put my feet up while I'm watching something to be at my most comfortable. But that is going to make the people around me deeply uncomfortable, and rightly so. I have to have a certain amount of regard for the people nearby to me, so I don't do any of those things. I turn up and act like a normal, decent human being, and I have a respect for people around me. For the same reason, I do not sing along loudly, even though I know the words to not just the jukebox musicals, all of them. I could sing along to all of them, and I don't, and you're welcome. Because the people on stage have been training for a great many years to do this. In most instances, they have trained and they have practiced and they have honed their craft, and in any case, they have been rehearsing and performing this show for an extended amount of time in preparation to give an excellent performance. And we do not want for that performance to be disrupted by someone drunkenly belting out the song behind your head, or even soberly belting out the song, or even soberly singing the song next to you. Get a grip, get a hold of yourselves, and just enjoy the experience. If you so desperately need to sing along, watch a DVD. Go to karaoke! Listen, there's options. So let's start with the incident itself and then spiral outwards. So let's start by looking at how this has been reported in the media. Let's go to the BBC. Theatre Etiquette in the spotlight after the Bodyguard incident in Manchester. I'm going to try and read this article without becoming too incensed with rage. Should you be allowed to sing along at a musical? After unwanted crowd participation led to The Bodyguard being cut short and police being called, the issue of audience behaviour, especially since the pandemic, has been thrust into the spotlight. Please refrain from singing along. Those words greet audiences on posters on the doors of Manchester's Palace Theatre and inside the foyers. Singing along at a musical might not sound like a big issue. It's often part of the fun. Is it? Is it, BBC? But on Friday, one over-enthusiastic audience member's backing vocals is a strong word here, during the big climax of I Will Always Love You led to a row, a scuffle, and a news story that blew up. Then we go to some somehow unironic quotes here. If people had spoiled it for everyone else, I would have been absolutely devastated, said Zoe from Burnley on her way in to see the show the next night. I will be singing, but low-key, she added. So I don't know how those two statements can go together, but somehow they do. I don't see what's wrong with singing along to some degree, said Anna from Hyde in Greater Manchester, but if it's the rules, then you've got to follow the rules. When drink's involved, it can get a bit annoying. Amanda from Burnley said, we've been to quite a few shows and we've sung, but not wanting to do a solo or anything like that. You wouldn't stand up and stand out from the crowd. Husband Simon added, if other people around you are doing it, you just join in, don't you? There are Tina Turner and ABBA musicals where everyone's singing, so it's part of it sometimes. Actually, no. In neither the Tina Turner musical, nor Mamma Mia are you supposed to sing during the show. But the BBC is quite happy to just spread this misinformation with no regard for the actual truth. So here's what really happened. So I actually had a couple of the ushers who were working at the show in question get in touch with me via social media. Their identities are being anonymized in this video. Think of it like witness protection, but with interval ice cream. So I've collated some of the things that have been said. So as a reminder, we're talking about the Bodyguard here on tour in the UK. So the show had issues at previous touring venues, and so the company wanted more strict rules in Manchester, hence the new no singing signs, and performers said they would walk off as soon as the audience disrupts the show. I'd like you to remember that a little bit later. The performers said they would walk off as soon as the audience disrupt the show. All week, staff have been photographed without permission, verbally abused, and more for the rule which has come from the company and not the venue. So tonight we had disruptive patrons being booed many times by different parties and sworn at for the no singing rule, and a show stop for ejections during the first act. That means they were chucking people out. Then in the second act, as the final song was on, a woman purposefully was singing along so loudly the whole theatre could hear her. The videos can be found on Twitter, I believe, and I'm just going to overlay a little bit of that audio for you here right now. Isn't that glorious? And then there was a fight between women in the grand tier, security and staff were threatened and physically assaulted, police had to be called, and the show wasn't able to continue for safety reasons. The media and many audience members believe it was for singing when ultimately it was for physical abuse. This is what I want to be really clear about. All of these headlines saying the show was stopped because people were singing along, and people are reacting on Twitter, because of course they are, because Twitter is famously the home of nuance and deliciously rich context. So people are reacting on Twitter because they're not reading into it very sensibly, and they are just seeing these headlines about shows being stopped and cancelled because of people singing along, and they're thinking, gosh, that's ridiculous. And it is when you read it like that, but it's not about people singing along. The show's not being cancelled because people decided to sing along to Whitney Houston. The show is being cancelled because that gave way to a dangerous and disruptive situation. None of these theatres want to cancel performances. None of these shows, none of these stage managers, company managers, nobody wants for this to happen. Everyone is trying, especially post-pandemic, to make these shows happen, and they will continue in the face of so much adversity. They will go on in spite of so many obstacles. If they are A, stopping the show, and B, cancelling the show, there is a very legitimate reason for this. Now, the reason that this has blown up so completely and become a topic that has been circling around on theatre Twitter for the entirety of the 4-day bank holiday weekend here in the UK, that's been fun for us all to read constantly, is because of a segment on a British TV programme called This Morning, in which its presenters addressed this issue and flippantly discussed whether or not it was disruptive to sing in a musical. The presenters were Alison, Hammond, Vanessa, Feltz and Dermot O'Leary, and I'm going to embed just a little bit of the clip here so you can see what we're talking about.
Should you be allowed to sing along in the audience at a show? They are regularly walking up and down the aisles before the performance and during the interval with no singing signs. I mean, I can't believe it. I'd be devastated. I'm not even going to go to that show now.
Isn't the whole point of going to a musical that you know, that you sing along to all the bits you know, and then when you don't know the words, you just make them up?
Now, there's so much to say about this, aside from the fact that they are laughing about it and they have so little regard for the seriousness of this as an issue, and if you don't think it's serious, we're going to get to why it really is. That's disappointing, especially when two of them, I don't really know about Dermot O'Leary, but two of them really ought to know better. So to provide some personal insight here, I have sat next to Vanessa Feltz, or if not next to, near to Vanessa Feltz, at countless press nights. There was a moment in time, that is a Whitney Houston reference, where it was starting to feel like a running joke that constantly Erin and I would be near to Vanessa Feltz. We would turn up, where's our seats, where's Vanessa Feltz? Good, everything's in place, the show can go on. Come From Away, she was there. Mamma Mia the Party, she was there. Dolly Parton's Smoky Mountain Christmas Carol, against all odds, that is not a Whitney Houston reference, that's Mariah Carey, she was there. And at various other shows as well. And for what it's worth, at none of these have I ever heard her singing along. And in this clip, she suggests that that is what you would do. At least it seems as though she's suggesting that. Upon watching this clip back, I am now 80% sure that what she's doing is somewhere between just trying to be like down to earth and relatable and silly, or just, I think she's joking almost, but it's not a well-delivered joke, so you can't tell that she's being insincere. But the line at the end about having a massive ice cream and making up the words to the songs and the way she's laughing about it, I don't think she actually means any of this, but I think the way that the issue was raised makes the whole thing seem so trivial that they're just laughing about it. They're not addressing it with any kind of sincerity or saying how they actually feel about it, except for Dermot O'Leary, who tries to broach it with some level of seriousness. Alison Hammond is no better. She was at the theatre in the days before this, seeing the Great British Bake Off musical, because she has recently been announced to be one of the new hosts of the Great British Bake Off TV series, Synergy. But she, I think, delivers the most disappointing words in this clip, because she actually says she's now not going to see the Bodyguard musical. She said she's not going to go and see the show because she's so upset at the prospect of not being able to sing along. She later says to Dermot O'Leary, do you really expect her to go see Wicked and not belt out Defying Gravity when Defying Gravity is happening? To which the answer is, of course, yes, please don't do that. Even at cast change performances, they don't do that. They just scream. It's haunting, actually. But she seems to really mean this, more so than Vanessa Feltz does, and she seems really disappointed at the prospect of not singing along in the theatre. And this seems to come from, for what it's worth, a genuine fondness for musicals and for the theatre, but it's entirely the wrong approach. And the fact that this was said on TV and went almost unchallenged, now Dermot O'Leary and the other gentleman who was participating via video link into this conversation, they both attempt to counter this. Dermot O'Leary does a slightly more ineffectual job of this, but he does raise an alternative viewpoint. And he says from his perspective that you ought not to do this. He doesn't really mind if people sing along as long as it's not too loudly. And then he makes some jokes with them. And the whole thing is bad. It's very bad because we don't talk about theatre going and theatre culture very much at all in mainstream media. In order for musicals to get platformed on mainstream media, it's just performances of songs from the shows, or it has to be something very, very buzzy, like a big celebrity going into a play, or Andrew Lloyd Webber has written a new musical. And that's really the only times that musical theatre actually comes to the forefront of British media. So for this discussion to have such a platform and such an opportunity to say to audience members, by the way, this is sort of a theatre-going expectation in terms of theatre etiquette, which is a whole can of worms I'm going to address later in the video, don't you worry. The fact that we didn't do any of that and we just did a little bit more damage by suggesting to people that it's fine and what you ought to do to go to musicals and loudly sing along and sing whatever lyrics you think are right and then eat an ice cream and belt Defying Gravity. I can't even. That obviously is hugely damaging and reinforcing this really unwanted expectation. At the same time, I think the outrage that emerged about this was maybe a little bit unreasonable. I think things get said on live television in the moment. They were clearly trying to be funny. They were clearly just trying to have banter. I do think Dermot O'Leary was very much trying to be in the right place, but he didn't want to come across unnecessarily severe because it's a light-hearted segment, it's daytime television. He's not going to come across like, no, I think you're both being dreadful, actually. Like, that would be an incredibly awkward TV moment. Obviously, he was trying to make light of this whole thing, but if you watch the clip back, he is putting across the idea that actually really what they're saying is ridiculous. When Alison Hammond says to him, do you really expect me not to belt out Defying Gravity? And he says, no, I expect you to, in a very pejorative way. So I have no beef with him. I have no beef with Dermot at this time. Vanessa Feltz, I am confused because this is not how she actually behaves when she goes to the theatre. I think for some reason, and this is not just her, I think a lot of the time there are these two different concepts. There is the theatre, which is this British institution, Shakespeare and plays, and glasses of wine in plastic cups and dressing up and red velvet seats and curtains. And then there are musicals, which are all sequins and sparkles and a Friday night out with the girls from the office. And at the theatre, you just sort of politely and quietly watch. It's culture, it's important. I think that's what Vanessa Feltz realises she goes to, and she doesn't think that she really goes to musicals. So she was on TV talking about musicals when what she goes to is the theatre, and these are two very different things in her world. This is kind of like patting your head and rubbing your stomach at the same time. So to my mind, that goes some of the way towards explaining why she would suggest she behaves in this way that she really doesn't. I can tell you from a first-hand eyewitness perspective, she does not sing along at musicals. She just doesn't. I think the whole thing was just misjudged, and I think they're separated from the theatre community, so they don't understand the issue that this is. At this point, I feel like I'm starting to sound ridiculous by calling this a big issue within the community. Let me tell you why. So the problem is not people singing along. It's annoying, and I wish they wouldn't, and a lot of people wish they wouldn't, but that's not the real problem. That's not the impact of this problem. The problem is that people get annoyed by this, and it causes fights within the auditorium, and the ushers who are tasked with de-escalating this behaviour are the ones on the front lines who have to deal with argumentative and often abusive audience members. The real issue here is the front of house staff who are being verbally abused, physically assaulted, being made to feel incredibly anxious in the line of duty that I should not be describing as a line of duty. This ought to be a job where they are putting on waistcoats and little magnetic name badges and selling ice creams for increasingly ridiculous prices. This ought not to be a job where they are having to think about de-escalation training and combat scenarios. Like, the most serious of their concerns should be fire safety and fire exits. They should not have to think about the security issues that continue to arise within these drunken and increasingly combative audiences. I'm going to continue reading what was sent in. The verbal abuse we received after the show was abandoned was disgusting, and it felt scary to be at work. This is heartbreaking. Of course, not helped by the comments on this morning, but I hope this sparks some serious change, as it feels dangerous for front of house staff everywhere to come to work, which it absolutely shouldn't. And there have been so many things said about this, about front of house staff feeling uncomfortable and anxious and using their holiday dates to book off certain shows which they think are going to bring problematic audience members. If you're watching this and worrying about booking certain shows that bring problematic audience members, hopefully this is not something that you encounter. I'm not saying that this happens at every single jukebox musical or every single Friday and Saturday night, but those are probably the shows I tend to avoid. If I was going to see some of those type of shows, if I was going to see a jukebox musical, I would try and avoid the Friday and Saturday night performances. I would go and see a matinee instead, because I'm not saying that British audiences aren't drinking at a matinee, I just don't think they'd be that drunk yet. But that hopefully has illustrated the real issue at play here, which is that front of house staff are the ones who are having to deal with the fallout from these situations, from these problems. And what I find super incredulous is these audience members who behave with such an air of entitlement. They are so taken aback that people would have a go at them for singing, that people would tell them not to behave exactly as they want to behave, that they are entering an environment where they do not have complete control of everything around them. And I do think that this is something that we're seeing more of post-COVID. I think we were all in our little bubbles and we had, in many ways, no control because the outside world had been taken away from us. But then in other ways, we had complete control because you can control everything in your immediate environment. I was teaching teenagers before, during, and after the pandemic, and I noticed a significant change in classroom management and classroom behavior because there was all of a sudden a huge reluctance for students to have to submit to environments and circumstances beyond their control. I tell someone that they need to put their sandwich away beforehand, they'd have got that and they'd have understood that that was just the deal with entering into a classroom. Post-lockdown, it was an outrage all of a sudden. That's just one trivial example, but this was a definite trend that I observed, and I think we're seeing the same thing in audience members, and that's where this violence and this animosity is coming from. The other side of it is the alcohol. We can't not talk about alcohol as a factor in theatres. Having now been to Broadway and then come back to the West End, I do think that British audiences drink more. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we don't really go out drinking after shows, which is something that happens more on Broadway. New York stays open a little longer. It's the city that never sleeps, whereas London is definitely the city that sleeps. I think people are drinking earlier. I think people are drinking more. I think people are drinking more at the theatre and using the bars at the theatre more. There's a host of reasons that they buy more drinks at the theatre in the West End versus Broadway. It has a lot to do with the foyer spaces and the number of bars and how early the bars open. And there have been a lot of calls throughout this for theatres to crack down on alcohol within audiences, and some people are saying they shouldn't sell alcohol at all. Now that's not about to happen because it's an enormous moneymaker for these theatres. Other people have said they shouldn't be admitting drunken audience members, and I do wish that there was more infrastructure in place and more staff and more security to prevent already drunk audience members being admitted into shows. I think more venues just need security as a priority. Thank God we could see there were security staff present at the Manchester Theatre where this took place for this performance. I cannot imagine if the front of house had to deal with this situation alone, but I have heard about theatres where the front of house have had this level of expectation because they don't have the necessary security in place. I also think at the same time, there is a level of expectation and there are rules of engagement when you enter into a theatre, but we still have to expect people to have common sense. And I don't think we can treat people entirely like children or entirely like babies. Some people will disagree with me and suggest that we should. But I do think you have to extend people the opportunity to attempt to behave themselves. So this happened a few days ago, and I didn't make a video straight away, and the reasons for that are threefold. 1, I had other videos going out this weekend that were already planned. 2, I actually had Easter bank holiday weekend plans that kept me from being able to film a video. And 3, I was waiting for the statements. So when something gains this much traction on social media, it needs to be addressed. And Alison, Hammond and Dermot O'Leary have now made a statement, as has the Manchester Theatre where this took place. Let's have a read of some of those statements together. So this one is from the theatre. They said, the performance of the Bodyguard at the Palace Theatre Manchester was stopped at 9:40 p.m. last night and not continued. Dramatic. We are disappointed that the last 10 minutes of the show needed to be cancelled due to disruptive customers refusing to stay seated and spoiling the performance for others. We are grateful to our venue teams for dealing with these difficult circumstances in a professional and calm way, and to Greater Manchester Police for their assistance. Future performances will continue as planned, and we ask that customers are considerate towards the cast, fellow audience members and theatre team so that everyone can enjoy the wonderful entertainment on stage. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Very hard to disagree with any of that. Meanwhile, the presenters from This Morning have also released statements, at least 2 out of 3 of them have that I've seen so far. So after much social media outrage, Alison Hammond has said this. After reflection and the comments I made on Wednesday's show, I want to apologise to anyone who I offended, especially the incredibly talented theatre performers who I have the utmost respect for. I had no idea the level of disruption audiences were causing and tried to make light of the topic on Wednesday's show, and for that I'm truly sorry. Like I said, they exist outside of this theatre bubble. I don't think they were cognizant of what an issue this has become for theatres and audiences and performers and front of house teams, which is why it was a topic worth discussing. And it's a shame, I guess, that that wasn't adequately researched or looked into, because there have been articles about this. It's made the national news already. They could have watched my video. I am a great supporter of theatre and the arts and would never sing at the top of my lungs at any performance. I was wrong in what I said, and I've given this a lot of thought over the past few days and believe I was wrong. I appreciate that this is just a genuine apology, and she's saying I was wrong multiple times. She is saying sorry. It's interesting, she's also saying I would never sing at the top of my lungs, having implied on the programme that that's exactly what she would do. So I do think that none of them really meant what was said, and they were trying to be flippant, and like she'd said before, trying to make light of this issue and trying to be funny and relatable. That's her whole thing, and that's why people love her. On Thursday evening, I attended a performance of The Great British Bake Off the musical, which I absolutely loved, and gave a standing ovation. Theatre is a magical experience for me and my family. Nice little mention for Bake Off there. I want to use my platform for good, as always, wicked reference, and want to stand up with the performers, front of house and theatre staff, especially after seeing what happened at the Bodyguard in Manchester, which has made me sick to my stomach. Once again, I am truly sorry, but trust me, I will do better in future. Like I said, very heartfelt, very sincere, very genuine. acknowledges the issues, talking about actually going to the theatre. I like all of that. A slightly more controversial statement was put out by Dermot O'Leary. Now, like I said before, I don't think he had an awful lot to apologise for. He didn't debate them super assertively on the programme, but have you not been in those situations where people are saying things you really disagree with and you kind of lightly try and go against it and say like, yeah, but do you not think this? While in your head you're going, wow, I super disagree with this, especially if you're on national television trying to host like a light-hearted chat. So I don't place a lot of blame with him in the first instance. I think his heart was in the right place. He said, "Evening all. A lot of people commenting about a reaction to a story we covered on this morning about the Bodyguard show and audiences singing along. Could I politely urge anyone passing judgment on the clip to watch the whole interview, as I was actually arguing against people singing too loudly in theatres. He was, not vehemently, but he was. Nothing but love and respect for those treading the boards. Peace and love to all. Now back to those Easter eggs." And people have been mad at this because he's not sincere. He's not genuine. It's not heartfelt. He hasn't said, "I'm sorry." And I just think by the time that these actually came out, and there was a little bit of delay in them making statements because it was a 4-day bank holiday weekend. People were spending time with their families and eating a gratuitous amount of chocolate. By the time these came out, theatre Twitter had become something of a mob, which was stirred into a frenzy. A frenzy the likes of which we don't see for a whole host of other issues that we probably should. And so anything less than him just genuflecting and prostrating himself in front of the theatre Twitter mob was not going to go down well. And so people were saying, well, why don't you blame the This Morning team? They edited the clip. Why don't you take it up with them? And, like, clearly he's not responsible for that. Clearly he isn't participating in the television show and then going back to the editing rooms and saying, right, you should use this one and this one, then liaising with the social media teams. Like, it takes a village to put these things together. So I don't necessarily think we need to hold him accountable for everything that goes out via social media and the way that this clip was cut and everything that was said in that segment when he is only one of 4 people who are having a conversation. And he was much closer to the side we wish they had all come down on. However, rather than these statements going out via Twitter, I would love it if they would use this massive platform to address what actually ended up happening and apologise on air and then articulate why it's important that people behave as expected when they go to the theatre. I keep saying as expected. What I mean here is in line with the theatre's expectations and regulations, because you go to the theatre and like anywhere else, there are expectations and regulations. If you think, gosh, that's very strict and what is the world coming to? I unfortunately have news for you, and that's the case everywhere you go. It's the same reason you can't go to a bank and start peeing in the corner, because that's not how the world works. It's the same reason you have to wear shoes into a restaurant or clothes when you leave the house. Like, we know that things are expected of us in society, and different buildings and different activities call for different regulations. You can't go to a restaurant and suddenly act in a hugely disorderly way. You can't do that at a museum. You can't do that at a cinema. You can't do that in a whole host of places. You can't do that at a theatre. Now, as far as I can see, Vanessa Feltz has not yet made a statement. And if anything comes to light in between me filming and publishing this video, then I will subsequently edit that in. But from what I can tell, she hasn't subsequently said anything about it. So through all of this, it has resurrected this conversation about theatre etiquette, which is not a term that I love. It's a concept that I can get behind. I do think we need to have a conversation about expectations within a theatrical space for audiences, but I don't love the words theatre etiquette because I think it has kind of classist overtones. And I think a lot of the time when we talk about theatre etiquette in Britain, a lot of these conversations can then give way to imposing a very middle-class white perspective on reasonable audience behaviour onto everyone who may be in that space. This idea of utter, focused, complete silence, don't even touch any sweet wrappers, and like, I don't want anyone to be disruptive at the theatre. I love those moments of like silence where you can hear a pin drop. I love for everyone to be in it and participatory and communal. I think there's something really magic and special in that, but I don't think we're going to achieve that by just beating people into submission. I think we have to try and curate the audience experience in a little bit of a more careful way, rather than just imposing these sets of regulations and drawing up a list of theatre etiquette and saying, this, you must do this. How dare you, like, react to a play? Like, there are gasps. We know there are shows like Hadestown on Broadway where people are going to gasp and people are going to laugh. And I've heard about people having loud, distracting laughs and people being berated for that. And I think the capacity for people to be annoyed by people near to them is enormous. And if I vocalized every single annoyance I had in the theatre, it would be ridiculous. Like the tiniest, silliest, obtrusive thoughts can enter my head when I'm watching a play and someone 5 rows away annoys me because their watch like reflects some light. Their watch isn't on, it's nothing they've done, but it reflects some light and it like shines at me and I'm like, I'm annoyed now, you've annoyed me. It's nothing they've done, it's not their fault. But those things can happen very easily. What you can control is not singing along to a show. So I do welcome this conversation about theatre etiquette and why we might need to dismantle it a little bit, but a lot of people are kind of jumping on this and saying, well, we shouldn't have theatre etiquette because we should let audiences do what they want. This is not the moment to have that conversation. It's also not the moment to push this theatre etiquette agenda. What we really need to talk about is people treating front of house staff members with dignity and kindness and understanding and treating them like human beings rather than treating them like these faceless symbols of authority and tyranny that we have to push against. Because in fact, that's not what they are. They're just very anxious, underpaid people who are working in the theatre for a genuine love of it. Like no one is doing that job if they don't want to be working in the theatre industry because it doesn't pay well enough for you to want to go into that particular line of work. You could go and work anywhere else and work better hours and make more money and not have to be assaulted, which honestly, that's just a win-win-win all around. My heart goes out to anyone experiencing anything like this in a front of house capacity. I feel for you tremendously because all of you facilitate theatrical experiences for the rest of us. We owe an awful lot to front of house members. We couldn't all go and see shows if it wasn't for people willing to work in front of house jobs in spite of everything that they're coming up against. If you think I'm being overdramatic, go watch my other video and hear about all of the things, the dreadful things happening right now to ushers on both sides of the Atlantic. I also don't think we can have this conversation without acknowledging that theatre ticket prices are prohibitively expensive for many people. And that works both ways. You know, some people are spending so much on theatre tickets that they want to have a really great time. They're going to go all out and they're going to spend more on alcohol because this is their one big night out. They're not going to the theatre as much as they used to. They can only afford to go once a month, once a year maybe. And they're going to have a great time. They're going to sing along, sing, dance, make memories. Linda? I don't know who Linda is. And for other people, it sucks because they've paid an awful lot and they don't want their experience to be ruined by someone else having what they consider to be their perfect experience. But I refuse to believe that your experience will be impaired by just sitting still and enjoying the quality performance. If you're not going to have a good time just listening to the performance on stage and not participating in it, theatre's not for you. I don't think theatre's for you. Go to a concert, wait until the invariable moment at the end of most jukebox shows when you can sing along to like the bows or the very last bit, not the big emotional ballad towards the end of the show. Wait for the very end. But I just don't think theatre is for you. I really don't. But those have been my thoughts about this little weekend drama. Let me know what you think in the comments section down below. I know you will because we all have opinions here on YouTube. Remember in the comments, as you would in a theatre, to treat everyone with dignity and respect. Everyone is a human being, myself included, as are all of you. I hope that you have enjoyed. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my Stagey YouTube channel. It's not always about news and drama. Sometimes I get to talk about nice things as well. But if you like the news and drama, there's plenty of that too. Don't you worry. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day. For 10 more seconds, I'm MickeyJoTheatre. Oh my god, hey. Thanks for watching. Have a stagey day. Subscribe!